Oh, this is going to be a drag, but it serves a purpose. I could either wait until December to take a Florida civic literacy exam, or this American government CLEP is equivalent to that. And because modern states will pay for it if I pass this online course, and taking the CLEP isn't that bad, except I had to hide my TV set in the other. I had to dismantle my TV set to take it in a room with the TV because it was like a second monitor. Oh, okay, whatever. Hide the books or put the books away. Could only use a whiteboard, but whatever. It's doable. CLEP exams online are doable, so. Okay, so here we go. I didn't expect to do this, but if I have to do the same work and this will give me 3 credit hours, then I'll get 3 credit hours. I'm not going to worry about excess credit hours. I'm just not going to worry about that. If I'm going to do the same work, I should get credit for it, so I'm going to see if I can. Oh, what a drag this will be.
And returning him
Okay, I
safely
like
to the
American
earth.
government, so maybe it won't be so
I'm
bad.
Professor Rebecca LeBeau. I'm currently with the Department of History at Rutgers University. In this course, I'll be teaching you everything you need to know about American government in order to pass the CLEP exam, earn college credits, and move on to upper-level undergraduate courses in political science, if you so choose. This thorough background in American government will also give you a greater understanding of the news on politics and the government that you might get from the radio, from TV, online, or in print on a day-to-day basis. You'll find out why the people around you and across the country vote the way they do. And hopefully, with this additional knowledge, become part of the engaged citizenry that votes. You'll become more aware of your rights as outlined in the Bill of Rights by the framers of the Constitution, the rights that your predecessors have fought very hard for, and the liberties you're entitled to. This course is split into 5 sections. Module 1, Institutions, the Policy Processes, Presidency, Bureaucracy, and Congress. 2, Federal Courts, Civil Liberties, and Civil Rights. Module 3, Political Parties and Interest Groups and the differences between them. Module 4, Political Beliefs and Behavior and the Influence of Public Opinion on Politics and on Policies. Finally, in Module 5, we'll learn about the constitutional foundation of American democracy. All right, let's get to work.
I will definitely be running this at a higher speed.
Welcome to edX. I'm Anant Agrawal. I'm the president of edX. I'm also a professor of electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. Online learning is revolutionizing the world. Education will never be the same again, and edX is at the cutting edge of this revolution. So when you take edX courses online, you are part of this revolution. Online learning is the ultimate democratizer. When you learn on edX, you are joining a community. Imagine taking a class with 100,000 or more students quality education. edX will increase access to learning.
Single space project in this area to be more interesting.
Welcome to the
System.
My name is Emily Paulson, and I am the wide variety of students that we're able to reach and who are able to help earn a college degree.
This is interesting, actually, but I've already seen this. I don't think I need all of those because let's get back to the course. Okay. Sorry about the fan.
Hi, I'm Steve Klinsky. I'm the founder and chairman of the Modern States Education Alliance. The goal of our philanthropy is to create a great traditional universities.
For too long, people have been denied a path to college education.
To get college credit.
All right. I think I'm going to get some cough drops because I'll be here for a while. Okay. Here we are again. Well, here I am. If anybody's watching, God bless you.
In this module, we'll be talking about institutions and policy processes, the presidency, bureaucracy, and Congress. Congress is Article 1 of the Constitution. It's a long, involved article and sets up a bicameral legislature. The House of Representatives has 435 members, and the Senate has 100 members, and we'll be discussing all of these in the first section. The President is relegated to Article 2 of the Constitution, and we'll be talking about the President, the First Lady, and the Vice President. In The next section will be talking about the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy was not written into the Constitution, but was designed to help Congress and the President fulfill their duties. After that, we'll be discussing the structure, policy processes, and outputs, really how legislation works or how a bill becomes a law. And I'll walk you through all of the complicated steps to make that happen. The last section will be relationships among these institutions and the links between them, and we'll focus on the media, which is sometimes called the fourth branch of government. Let's get started.
I don't think I have to be so big. I think I can make this shorter and wider. My closed caption can go higher, I think. Can it go higher? Oh, beautiful. Not chemical fire. And I can restrict it to a couple lines. Like, how about that? Oh, no, don't mess me up. That's as far as I can go. All right. Make you shorter. Shorter. Wider. There we go. And then if this is full screen, maybe that'll be better to look at. Okay. A little better. All right. Is it better like that? No, not really. Good enough. Here we go. Ignore all that stuff
In this
up there.
section, we'll be talking about Congress. The framers designed Congress in depth in Article 1 of the Constitution. We'll be talking about Congress's enumerated and implied powers. So the enumerated powers are those that are listed in the Constitution, and the others are just implied. One of the most important powers that Congress has is that Congress has the power to tax. That is in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and that article is very detailed, so we'll go over that closely. We'll also be discussing congressional organization, rules, and committees. Congress has the power to create many different committees. In fact, there's even a committee, the steering committee, to decide what other committees there are and who goes on what committee. Let's begin.
I wasn't paying attention to that.
In this section, we'll be talking about Congress. The framers designed Congress in depth in Article 1 of the Constitution. We'll be talking about Congress's enumerated and implied powers. So the enumerated powers are those that are listed in the Constitution, and the others are just implied. One of the most important powers that Congress has is that Congress has the power to tax. That is in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and that article is very detailed, so we'll go over that closely. We'll also be discussing congressional organization, rules, and committees. Congress has the power to create many different committees. In fact, there's even a committee, the steering committee, to decide what other committees there are and who goes on what committee. Let's begin. As discussed in Module 5, framer Alexander Hamilton was a strong advocate of a powerful national government. Hamilton believed in an interpretation of the Constitution called loose construction, that the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution, also known as the elastic clause, allowed the national government to do whatever was necessary and proper for the smooth governing of the nation. This enabled an expansion of the national government. Hamilton argued Congress had the power to create a centralized bank because of this elastic clause. A political showdown between Maryland and the federal government occurred when James McCulloch, an agent for the Baltimore branch of the Second National Bank of the United States, refused to pay a tax that Maryland had imposed on all out-of-state chartered banks. The standoff raised two constitutional questions. The first was, did Congress have the authority to charter a national bank? Were states allowed to tax federal property? In the 1819 Supreme Court case, McCulloch versus Maryland, Chief Justice John Marshall argued that Congress could create a national bank even though the Constitution did not expressly authorize it. Under the Necessary and Proper Clause of Article 1, Section 8, the Supreme Court asserted that Congress could establish all means which are appropriate to fulfill the legitimate ends of the Constitution. In other words, the bank was an appropriate instrument that enabled the national government to carry out several of its enumerated powers, such as regulating interstate commerce, collecting taxes, and borrowing money. For example, the federal government's right to enact a draft, which occurred for the first time during the Civil War and was called a conscription but renamed a draft during World War I, is considered necessary for Congress to declare and wage war, for example. So Congress's right to do so can be found in the Necessary and Proper Clause. The McCulloch ruling established the doctrine of implied powers, granting Congress a vast source of discretionary power to achieve its constitutional responsibilities. Here, the Supreme Court also sided with the federal government on the issue of whether states could tax federal property. Under the Supremacy Clause of Article 6, legitimate national laws trumped conflicting state laws. Let's clarify these different types of powers before moving on. Implied powers are inferred from delegated powers. Delegated powers are those specifically assigned to the jurisdiction of the national government. Inherent powers are those integral to the national sovereignty, such as the power to declare war, necessary in the conduct of foreign policy. Delegated and inherent powers are also called enumerated powers because they are explicitly stated or listed in the Constitution. Another enumerated power of Congress, again meaning those specifically written into the Constitution, is the power to impeach. Article 1, Section 3 states that the House alone shall have the political power to make this accusation, and the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. Two presidents have been impeached, Andrew Jackson and Bill Clinton, but neither were removed from office because of the impeachment. Both of them received a simple majority vote in the House, but in both cases fell short of the 2/3 vote needed in the Senate for removal. President Richard Nixon resigned before facing impeachment. Impeachment will be discussed further in Module 1.2. Congress also has the power to regulate and discipline itself. The most severe form of discipline is expulsion, which requires a 2/3 vote. During the Civil War, a number of congressmen were expelled, but many of them served in the Confederate Congress in Richmond, Virginia. Another form of discipline is censure. That's a formal reprimand, and this too happens very rarely. Short of censure, congressional ethics committees can write formal letters of admonishment, offering warnings for behavior not becoming a congressman. With the exception of treasony, felony, or breach of peace, congressmen cannot be arrested while Congress is in session. They also cannot be arrested for something they said during congressional speeches or debate. This is to protect unpopular viewpoints. Speaking of being arrested, as per Article 1, Section 9, Congress specifically does not have the power to do certain things, such as make an act illegal after it has already been performed. In other words, no post facto laws can be made. Congress is also forbidden, except in times of war or insurrection, from suspending habeas corpus, which in Latin means you have the body. This means that a person has the right to be brought before a judge who will explain the charges clearly against the prisoner. Congress also does not have the power to create nobility. While the Kennedys have been called American royalty, and First Lady Jackie Kennedy helped cement this image in the minds of the public with interviews about how the president liked the music of the musical Camelot, Camelot's about a castle and a court, legendary King Arthur, they were not, in fact, members of the nobility. Section 8 of Article 1 is by far the most detailed section. It gives Congress the power to establish post offices and coin money. Coining money happens at the U.S. Mint. It also gives Congress the power to print paper money, and this occurs at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. And finally, it gives Congress the power to tax, and we'll be talking about that extensively in the next module, Module 1.1.2. Continue to do your readings and review this video and answer your questions.
Reading.
The power of the purse is important. Article 1, Section 7 gives Congress the power to raise revenue in order for the government to function. This section says bills must be initiated in the House, but that the Senate can propose them and concur on them. In other words, the House is the chamber where all taxing and spending bills begin. The government gets 80% of its revenue via taxation. And Article 1, Section 8, also discussed in Module 1.1.1, an extremely detailed section, it required Congress to collect taxes and import duties or tariffs. Many types of taxation exist. The income tax is a tax levied on income. Legal loopholes make tax laws complicated. Generally, the more you earn, the higher your tax rate. This is called a progressive tax. The poor and working poor do not pay an income tax. In addition to an income tax, workers pay a payroll tax, and that's matched by the employer. It's comprised of a Social Security and a Medicare tax. These are flat taxes. They are not levied on investments, and because the wealthier individuals tend to invest more, lower income people may pay more into Social Security. This is called a regressive tax. Other types of taxation exist, and I'm sure you know about some of them, like a sales tax on purchased goods that are imposed at the state and local, not federal level. There's a sin tax on items like alcohol and cigarettes, and there's also an estate tax, which is sometimes called a death tax, levied on the property of people after they die. On April 15th, it may feel like you have to pay a lot in taxes to the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, which is the government body designed to help Congress collect taxes. But it turns out that Americans are the least taxed peoples in the industrialized world. Article 1, Section 8 also gives Congress the power to raise money through taxes, tariffs, and other means for national purposes, and also to pay the nation's debt. If the U.S. spends more money in a given year than it has a deficit. The public debt is the sum of the nation's deficit. The sale of bonds helps the government manage its deficit. The government sold Liberty bonds to help finance both world wars, for example. Since the 1921 Budget and Accounting Act, the President has submitted a budget to Congress for approval for each fiscal year, which runs from October 1st to September 30th. The budget process is inevitably very political because it sets fiscal policy, the use of taxes and expenditures to shape the nation's economy. The Bureau of the Budget, now the Office of Management and Budget, was formed to help the President manage this process. The budget the President sends to Congress involves the budget authority, the amount certain agencies will be allowed to spend, budget outlay, the amount agencies are expected to spend, and receipts, the amount the government is expected to take in via taxes and other sources. In Congress, the Congressional Budget Office helps manage the budget process, but the national debt kept growing. So the Gramm-Rudman Act of 1984 required Congress to start paying down the national debt each year, with the goal of being debt-free by 1991. This failed. In 1990, Congress addressed this failure by passing the Budget Enforcement Act, known as the BEA. The BEA defined two types of spending: mandatory spending for entitlements to which working contributors are entitled, like Social Security for the elderly, and discretionary spending, which can change. It's called a pay-as-you-go system, that any increases in entitlements had to be offset by taxes or cuts in discretionary spending. It also placed caps, upper limits, on discretionary funding. The Balanced Budget Act of 1997, this led not only to paying down the deficit, but to a surplus. Of course, the two parties argued about what to do with the additional income. The Republicans, they wanted to cut taxes, while the Democrats argued the money should go to Social Security programs. The Balanced Budget Act expired in 2002, and since then, the U.S. has had a growing debt, thanks in large part to the financing of nameless, faceless wars, like the war on terrorism. Article 1, Section 8, as I said, also gives Congress the power to borrow money for national purposes and to pay the nation's debt. The agencies set up to perform these tasks will be discussed in Module 1.3, the federal bureaucracy. Again, Article 1, Section 8, because it is so detailed, gives Congress a number of other powers as well, such as the right to coin and print money, to establish uniform rules on declaring bankruptcies, the right to establish post offices and post roads, the right to raise an army and maintain a navy, as well as to declare war, to punish piracy and felonies on the high seas, and it even gives authors and inventors the right to their respective writings and inventions, which are often in the form of copyrights, trademarks, and patents. And of course, this is the section in which the necessary and proper clause is found, that Congress has the power to do whatever is necessary and proper to carry out these responsibilities. Finally, it gives Congress the right to govern Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not a state, and it's not within a state. Sometimes it's called inside the Beltway, due to the highway that goes around the city, and it can seem like another planet. Since 1971, it has had a congressional delegate, a person who can vote in congressional committees, but not on final passage on the floor. The 23rd Amendment gave residents of D.C. the right to vote for president. Review this video as many times as you feel necessary, and continue to do the readings in your book and go over the questions carefully.
What book? The good news is I've done this stuff before. The bad news is it was a long time ago. But it's going to be annoying either way, so. Did I get the check mark? Yeah, I did. I'm glad I'm going through this. Another 7 minutes. Here we go.
In this module, we will be discussing congressional organization, rules, and committees. The House of Representatives consists of a proportional number of congressmen from each state depending on population. This is thanks to the Great Compromise, also known as the Connecticut Compromise, that the framers debated on that long, hot summer in Philadelphia. Alaska, for example, has just 1 congressman. California has 52. In total, the House consists of 435 members. The leadership of the House starts with the Speaker of the House at the top. The Speaker of the House is second in line for the presidency should anything happen to the President or the Vice President. The Speaker is selected by the majority party. She or he is the principal leader of the majority party as well as the presiding officer of the entire House. The majority party also elects a whip and a majority leader. The minority party also selects a minority leader and a minority whip. The whip serves a number of functions. She or he keeps the party leader informed about what party members are thinking on certain bills, and the whip is also in charge of determining what the likely vote will be on a controversial issue. In other words, how many senators will be voting in favor of the bill, and how many senators will be voting against a bill. The whip rounds up members prior to an important vote. The majority whip has deputy whips to help perform these duties. The Senate consists of 2 senators from each state, a senior senator and a junior senator. Their ranking is based on years in office. There are 100 senators in the Senate, plus the 435 members of the House, makes Congress comprised of 535 members. The Vice President of the United States is President of the Senate. In reality, the Vice President is rarely in the Senate, and his only function is to cast the tie-breaking vote should there be a tie. The Senate addresses the Vice President as President when in the Senate. The leadership of the Senate is called the President pro tempore. Pro tempore is Latin for of the time. It's sometimes shortened to President pro tem. Although the President pro tem is third in line of presidential succession after the Vice President and the Speaker of the House, it is a largely honorific position. It's usually given to the longest-serving member of the majority party. The majority party chooses the pro tem. The majority party and the minority party both select their own leaders and whips to perform the same functions as those in the House. Congress primarily gets its
Who's the president pro tempore now? Yeah, but who is it right now? Oh, hello, President pro tempore.
work done through committees. Both chambers employ a complex system of permanent committees to assist them in carrying out their legislative duties. A select committee is one that is formed to deal with a temporary matter. It is disbanded once the issue is resolved. In some cases, these are called ad hoc committees. Ad hoc is Latin for towards this thing. Each chamber even has a committee called the steering committee that decides which members serve on which committees. Congress uses a seniority system, which means that the members serving the longest often head up each committee. This isn't always the case, though, because in the 1970s, a secret ballot was introduced in the House leadership section. The ranking members can be passed up for leadership assignments if they do not share the views of the most powerful factions within the party. The chairs, or leaders of each committee, are from the majority party. The highest ranking member in the committee of the minority party is called the ranking committee member. The most powerful and influential committee assignment for a member of the House of Representatives is definitely the Ways and Means Committee, because it appropriates federal funding. Another example of the power of the House Ways and Means Committee is that it is just one of three committees, the Senate Committee on Finance and the Joint Committee on Taxation are the other two, that can request to privately review the tax documents of any individual in closed session and consider their public release. As a member of the Ways and Means Committee, Democratic Congressman Bill Pascrell of New Jersey recently called on the Ways and Means Committee chair to submit a formal request to the Secretary of the Treasury to release President Trump's tax returns. The House Rules Committee is also powerful because it limits the time for debate and determines whether amendments to a bill, which might impede its progress through Congress, can be considered. The Senate does not have a Rules Committee because less restrictions to debate exist in the Senate, and we'll discuss this further in just a minute. Both chambers have appropriations committees to allocate the spending of federal funds. Both chambers also have armed services committees, judiciary committees, and veterans affairs committees. Both houses have about 20 standing committees each. About 42 members serve on each House committee because there are so many members of the House, as opposed to just 8 on each Senate committee. The majority party ensures that it has enough members on each committee to control the committee. Congressmen also have the staff system to rely on, and that staff system includes legislators' personal staff, both in D.C. and in their home districts. I served as a staff member to a senator in his home district. Committee staffers who organize and administer the committee's work, and staff agencies such as the Congressional Research Service, the General Accounting Office, and Congressional Budget Office that serve as information bases for the congressmen. All the records of congressional business, by the way, they can be found in the Congressional Record. This register was previously called the Annals of Congress, also the Debates and Proceedings of Congress in the United States, and the Register of Debates in Congress, and the Congressional Globe. So it's had many names, but it can be easily researched online. The Congressional Record is split into 4 parts. A Daily Digest is the first part. It also includes a House section, that's the second part, a Senate section, and a section where congressional members' remarks can be extended if need be. Remember to review your readings and answer the questions, and review this video as many times as it takes to really learn the material.
Yeah. Questions. Why is my forehead so bald? Question 1. That's better. Maybe. Good enough. I'm okay with that. Well, what? Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, what a bother. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh, okay. No, this is good. Everybody should know. Everybody should know this stuff. I should know this stuff. I'm a citizen of the United States. I should know this stuff. These are not that bad.
In this submodule, we'll be discussing president in depth. The powers of the president have increased over the course of American history. So in the first section, we'll be talking about the president and his powers. In the second section, we'll be talking about the vice president and the first lady. The vice president is also written into the Constitution in Article 2 with the president, and also has had increased powers, particularly over the course of the 20th century. The first lady, which we'll also be talking about, is not written into the Constitution at all, but is an integral part of the president's team. Okay, let's get started.
Okay.
In this module, we're discussing the president and his powers. The presidency was relegated to Article 2 of the Constitution. The framers clearly thought that Congress, which was in Article 1, was the more important branch of government. The president must be born either in the United States or be a citizen of the United States and must be at least 35 years of age and must take the oath of office as prescribed in the Constitution. Opponents of Barack Obama, for example, claimed that he had not been born in the United States and therefore could not be president. He is indeed a citizen of the United States, born here and was president for 8 years. As discussed in Module 5, the framers of the Constitution were fearful that the chief executive would wield too much power. Having just extricated themselves from one monarch, they did not want to create something similar in the fledgling democracy. But one reason the Articles of Confederation were replaced was because there was no executive or judicial branches. The Articles of Confederation just had one branch, the legislative branch. In Great Britain, the monarch is the head of state, but the prime minister is the chief executive. In the US, which is a republic, the president fulfills both positions. He has both the ceremonial and the political roles as figurehead and as head of state. Originally, the president was the candidate that received the most votes in the Electoral College, and the vice president was the candidate that received the second most number of votes. This was changed by the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1804, to ensure that the president and the vice president were of the same party affiliation. The principal source of the president's political influence is their constitutional authority to execute public policies. Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution states that the president is also commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So the commander-in-chief is a citizen. He also has the power to grant pardons for offenses against the United States, except in the cases of impeachment. During President Barack Obama's final months in office, he granted a record number of pardons. Many of those pardons were of inmates imprisoned for nonviolent drug offenses. On Thanksgiving, the president even traditionally pardons a turkey. Part of the president's power to conduct foreign policy includes receiving foreign ambassadors. The president can also recognize foreign governments, for example. President Harry Truman made the U.S. the second country to recognize Israel in 1948. Britain was the first country to recognize Israel. And the president can also treat with foreign governments. According to the Constitution, the president has the power to negotiate treaties with foreign countries only with the advice and consent of the Senate. President George Washington set the precedent that only the Senate's consent was needed, though presidents generally hesitate to make them without a majority of the Senate's support. One exception to this was Woodrow Wilson's negotiation of America's participation in the League of Nations at the conclusion of World War I. He failed to get the necessary 2/3 support, and so it failed. A more recent exception is Bill Clinton's 1999 Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, a treaty that would have ended nuclear tests. It too failed to pass the Senate. Congress has also allowed the president executive agreements with foreign powers. As long as important matters remain the subject of treaties to be passed by the Senate, then executive orders are also a way for presidents to circumvent Congress. These orders have the rule of law if the courts do not overturn them. Franklin Roosevelt's Executive Order 9022 relocated Japanese Americans to internment camps during World War II. The Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of this executive order in the 1944 Supreme Court case Korematsu versus the United States. President Truman desegregated the military shortly after the war, for example, also by executive order. Presidents have the power to veto acts of Congress. The president's veto power is discussed in more detail in Module 5.3. Presidents can also invoke something called executive privilege. This is a way of withholding information from Congress, from the judiciary, and from the public. Signing statements are used by presidents to express how they intend to execute the bill they are signing into law. Although this was first developed in the 1800s, President George W. Bush used them more than any of his predecessors, about 800 times. And he usually used this to express his negative opinion of certain parts of a law. The president exercises his power of appointments to choose the cabinet. Cabinet members preside over federal agencies and provide key advice. The variety of expertise is supposed to discourage use them more than any of his tend to execute the bill they are signing into law. Although this was first developed in the 1800s, President George W. Bush used them more than in the public. Signing statements are used by presidents to express how they intend to execute the bill they are signing into law. Although this was first developed in the 1800s, President George W. Bush used them more than any of his predecessors, about 800 times. And he usually used this to express his negative opinion of certain parts of a law. The president exercises his power of appointments to choose a cabinet. Cabinet members preside over federal agencies and provide key advice. The variety of expertise is supposed to discourage groupthink. This is a term meaning that people close to the president, the decision maker, go along with the consensus of the group without a deep analysis of the issue, that they are afraid to deviate from the opinion of the majority and tell the president something he may not want to hear. The head of the Office of Management and Budget, as well as U.S. Ambassador to the UN, are both cabinet members. In addition to the cabinet, the president has personnel that comprise the executive office of the president to help him discharge his powers and his duties of the Oval Office. The Oval Office, of course, is his workspace in the White House. Many of these staff members work in the West Wing or in the old executive office building. I interned in the latter. The president also has the power to appoint ambassadors and appoint federal judges. Cabinet members, ambassadors, and federal judges are all subject to confirmation by the Senate. Usually the president's selections are approved, but this is not always the case, and sometimes they're more controversial. In Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution, the president is charged with, quote, taking care that the laws be faithfully executed and can only be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Of course, the president must vacate the office when his term is up. The Constitution states that the president will serve for a term of 4 years. George Washington set the precedent that the president would only serve 2 terms of 4 years each, totaling 8 years in the Oval Office. But it was not expressly written into the Constitution. President Franklin D. Roosevelt would break this precedent in 1940 and again in 1944 when he won a 3rd and a 4th term in office, respectively. America was in the midst of World War II, and the public was persuaded not to switch horses midstream, as the saying goes. After President Truman succeeded to the presidency due to the sudden death of FDR of cerebral hemorrhage on April 12, 1945, and then he won election in his own right in the presidential election of 1948, Republicans were tired of a Democrat in executive office. They passed the 22nd Amendment, ratified in 1951, that put a limit of 2 terms on the president. It also stated that any person who had served out more than 2 years of his predecessor's term could not run for more than 1 term. And it stated that it did not apply to the president currently in office at the time of ratification, which was Truman. Although an amendment to the Constitution does not need the president's signature to become law, it becomes law when 3/4 of the states ratify it. So upon ratification at the 38th state, and it would not have been passed by Truman's party, the Democrats in Congress at that time, without this last provision written into it. Truman decided not to run for re-election in 1952 anyway, and this was in part for personal reasons. The First Lady, Bess, spent quite a bit of time in Independence, Missouri with her daughter, where they were from, and she really didn't want him to run. And this was also in part because the Korean War, which was dragging on at the time, was unpopular. Truman, after consulting the Joint Chiefs of Staff, fired General MacArthur, and General MacArthur was so popular that he came home to a ticker tape parade in New York City. Be sure to review this video as many times as is necessary and do your readings and look closely at the questions.
Oh.
In this module, we'll be discussing the roles of the Vice President and the First Lady. The role of the Vice President was written into the Constitution by the framers, but the role of the First Lady was not, and these two are closest to the President. Originally, the Vice President was the person who received the second most number of Electoral College votes. Because that meant that the President and the Vice President could be of completely opposing political parties are discussed in Module 3.1, the 12th Amendment changed this. The Vice President simply served as President of the Senate, casting the tie-breaking vote. Recently, Vice President Mike Pence cast the tie-breaking votes on President Trump's nomination of Betsy DeVos to Education Secretary. This is the first time in history a presidential nomination has been this close, and the Vice President essentially got to approve the President's choice for a cabinet-level position. Vice President Harry Truman was not informed, for example, of the Manhattan Project and the existence of an atomic bomb, so presidents didn't feel the need to keep vice presidents informed. In fact, Truman found out after his sudden succession to the presidency when Franklin Roosevelt died suddenly in April of 1945. The next sudden succession during the nuclear age, when President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, led to the ratification of the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967. It took that long to make it through Congress and through the states after Kennedy's death. The 25th Amendment provides for presidential succession and inability. It has 4 sections. The first one states that upon the death, removal, the impeachment, or resignation of the president, the vice president becomes president. If the vice presidency of the United States is vacated, the Constitution now stipulates, Section 2 of the 25th Amendment, that the president must appoint a new vice president with the approval of Congress. And little did the framers of the 25th Amendment know that this would occur within a decade of the ratification of the 25th Amendment, when Republican President Nixon's Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned. Nixon nominated General Ford, and Ford was confirmed, as per the 25th Amendment, by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. Soon thereafter, Nixon himself resigned the presidency due to the Watergate scandal. This scandal was a break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters in Washington's Watergate Hotel. Members of the Committee to Re-elect the President, with a very apt acronym CREEP, were implicated in the crime. Ford took over as president and nominated Nelson Rockefeller of New York to become vice president. He was confirmed by a majority vote of both chambers. Section 3 of the 25th Amendment states that if the president determines he is enabled, he will notify the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House in writing, and the vice president will act as president until the inability is over. Section 4 also gives the vice president a unique role. If the president is enabled to the point where he cannot inform the president pro tem and the Speaker of the House in writing, the vice president, along with a majority of the cabinet, can do so, and the vice president will immediately act as president until the inability is over. The president would then transmit in writing when the inability was over, and he could resume his duties as president. If the vice president and cabinet disagree and believe that the president is still enabled, Congress would decide the issue. The 25th sets specific time limits for when this would occur, making the 25th the longest and the most complex of all constitutional amendments. Moving on to the First Lady's role, which again is not inscribed in the Constitution. As an advocate of her husband, the First Lady has an interesting role. First Ladies have had increasingly prominent roles in the last 100 years. Franklin Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor, was chosen as ambassador to the UN by President Truman. Truman relied on his wife, Bess, for personal decisions, and she chose to remain mostly in Independence, Missouri, rather than spend much time at the White House. President Kennedy's wife, Jacqueline, or Jackie as she was commonly known, spoke French and summered in France as a child. She accompanied Kennedy on a state visit with the French president, Charles de Gaulle. The French president was charmed with her glamour, as were the French people. Kennedy joked that he was simply, quote, the man who accompanied Jackie to France, and that he had enjoyed it. Jackie Kennedy took pride in refurbishing and redecorating the White House, and this was shown as a special on television. Often First Ladies have been assigned a particular role and will have staff to help them fulfill this role. The social office of the First Lady, for example, is located in the East Wing of the White House, and they do all sorts of tasks, including ironing out invitations. Nancy Reagan helped launch the Just Say No campaign against drugs. Hillary Clinton took on healthcare because in the 1990s, the United States was just the only one of 16 industrialized nations not to have universal healthcare. The insurance lobbies, or special interests, which are discussed in Module 3.2, they defeated universal health care in the 1990s, and for a while, Hillary Clinton remains behind the scenes, facing a backlash that she had taken an outsized role, too much power for a First Lady. The office of the First Lady made sure that the very next issue that brought her press attention was not a complicated policy issue. It was her chocolate chip cookie recipe. The next First Lady, Laura Bush, took on a safer or less controversial issue. As a former teacher, she worked on improving childhood literacy rates in the United States. Michelle Obama was a champion of women's rights. She was also the first to plant a victory garden at the White House, for example. Be sure to review this video as many times as you need to and carefully go over your readings and answer the questions.
Oh, question. Ah, oh no. Okay. Oh, God. All right, that's fair, actually. No, you can? Oh, of course you can. Can you recognize foreign? Yeah, okay. Oh,
In this submodule, we'll be talking about the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is not written into the Constitution, but it has grown greatly over the course of the 20th century and is designed by Congress to help take care of their duties and powers, and the president also increases the size of the bureaucracy as well. We'll also be talking about the bodies of the bureaucracy, from private corporations to agencies to specific regulatory agencies. So let's get started talking about the bureaucracy. In this module, we'll be discussing the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is not written into the Constitution, nor is it one of the three branches of government. But Congress has the power to pass legislation which creates government agencies and the guidelines that these agencies should follow. The agencies which make up the bureaucracy have the power of administrative discretion. The way these agencies interpret the law then sets policy. But implementing the laws Congress enacts is the main purpose of the bureaucracy. Although a bureaucracy has existed within many governments since their inception, the U.S.'s bureaucracy was initially very small. When Andrew Jackson became president in 1828, he awarded his supporters, party loyalists, jobs by the thousands. These jobs were awarded based on patronage, the concept that to the victor of the election go the political spoils of the jobs. The Pendleton Civil Service Act of 1833 was the first to deal with this issue just after Jackson left office. And the Pendleton Civil Service Act made some government jobs off limits to patronage and made it illegal to fire or otherwise punish civil service workers for strictly political reasons. So it established the Civil Service Commission to enforce parts of the law. Now most jobs at the federal level are civil service positions.
I didn't know that. I need a shirt because my arms are cold. Okay. I could use with some bug spray, some mosquitoes. Okay, got some crackers and some water.
They're not awarded on patronage. The Pendleton Civil Service Act required the passage of a civil service exam, usually an exam where you would fill in the bubbles. Today, it is much more common the individual will be interviewed about his or her education, background, knowledge, skills, and abilities, also known as KSAs, and these are similar to what's called core competencies in the private sector today. But it is important to note that the jobs are based on merit rather than political patronage, as in the age of Jackson. Congress also passed the Hatch Act, or the Political Activities Act of 1939, to ensure that civil servants did not work on political campaigns or use their position within the government to influence the outcome of an election.
Aha. Well, that gets broken all the time. Nobody enforces that. Nobody enforces. Who enforces the Hatch Act? Nobody. Pays to be powerful, I guess.
Today, the federal government is the single largest employer in the United States. The pension and benefits tend to be good in the government sector relative to the jobs in the private sector. A general schedule, or a pay schedule, based on 15 levels with 10 steps or ranks in them, each exists to ensure uniformity in pay. The bureaucracy is staffed by professionals, or people who intend to make a career out of the position they're in. Many of the years on the job leads to expertise in a particular area of specialization, such as foreign policy if you work in the State Department, or perhaps rainforest habitat if you work in the Environmental Protection Agency, although there's only one rainforest in the United States, in Puerto Rico. The public demand for and the expectation of social services, beginning in particular in response to the Great Depression, best explains the growth of the federal bureaucracy over the past 100 years. The president, at times, increased the federal bureaucracy. FDR created the Office of War Information by executive order in 1942, during World War II, for example. It was disbanded in 1945. Then the high-tech military establishment required by the Cold War was the main reason for the expansion of the bureaucracy and the enlargement of the federal budget, 4/5 of which was going to defense-related activities by the 1950s. Later, in the 1980s, even President Ronald Reagan, who ran on a platform of reducing the size of the federal government, found that he had increased the size of the Department of Defense, and the government grew bigger because of his commitment to Cold War armaments. So it grew bigger, not smaller, during his 8 years in office. Speaking of defense, the federal bureaucracy serves a great number of functions, from keeping track of who is eligible for the military, the Selective Service Administration does that, to housing, organizing, and restoring important documents at the National Archives and Records Administration, to delivering the mail. The U.S. Postal Service, of course, does that. Be sure to review the video as many times as is necessary so that you feel comfortable with the material. Also do the readings and answer the questions.
Okay. Pendleton Civil Service Act.
In this module, we're going to discuss the bodies of the bureaucracy. Again, the bureaucracy was not written into the Constitution, and it has greatly expanded over the course of United States history. The word bureaucracy, most textbooks agree, seems to have negative associations. It makes people think of red tape and long forms to fill out. Therefore, people often argue for privatization, deregulation, or devolution. Privatization is the turning over of functions to the private sector. Many contracts were given to Halliburton, a private company, for work during the Iraq War, for example. But it was argued that Halliburton was given those contracts due to close ties to then Vice President Dick Cheney. The idea with deregulation, the second one, is that the growth of government will slow because there'll be less regulations to make sure that the private sector is conforming with. Devolution is to transfer an increasing amount of functions the federal government usually performs to the states. There are multiple parts of the federal bureaucracy, including the cabinet, independent executive agencies, and regulatory agencies, for example. There's also government corporations. As discussed in Module 1.2, the president chooses his cabinet. George Washington's cabinet consisted of only 4 individuals, but today's secretaries are 15 federal departments, as well as the U.S. ambassador to the UN and the head of the Office of Management and Budget, and they are all cabinet members. Actually, the heads of all these departments are called secretaries, with the exception of the head of the Department of Justice, who's called the Attorney General. Some of the departments were created in 1789, early on, like the Department of State, as well as the Department of Treasury. But the most recent one was created in 2002. It was created in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. That department created in 2002 was the Department of Homeland Security. Like cabinet departments, independent executive agencies report directly to the president, with heads appointed by the president. Unlike the larger cabinet departments, however, independent agencies are assigned far more focused tasks. These agencies are considered independent because they are not subject to the regulatory authority of any specific department. Examples of independent agencies include the Federal Reserve and the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. The Federal Reserve provides financial services to depository institutions, the United States government, and foreign institutions, as well as plays a key role in operating the nation's payment systems. Though they are not subject to the control of any one department, one way to curtail their influence would be to put someone at the head of the EPA that does not believe in the agency's mission, which is to protect the environment. Agencies have mission-driven goals and also survival goals. To survive, agencies have to prove that their work is indispensable and that cutting back their budget would have not believe in the agency's mission, which is to protect the environment. Agencies have mission-driven goals and also survival goals. To survive, agencies have to prove that their work is indispensable and that cutting back their budget would have political costs. Agencies will form alliances with interest groups and members of Congress who work to ensure that the agency's services are not cut. The three-way relationship between congressional committees, interest groups, discussed in Module 3, and the bureaucracy is sometimes referred to as the Iron Triangle. This refers to the fact that political interest groups tend to lobby Congress to pass laws they're in favor of and suggest to the bureaucracy that they should enforce laws a certain way that works in their favor. Often, as a result of what is called a revolving door, lobbyists will be former employees with the government agency they are lobbying. A subset of these are regulatory agencies. These emerged during the late 1800s in an effort to control the benefits and costs of industrialization. Examples include the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, and the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC. The latter was designed to control the railroads. Their heyday was in the 1840s. This brings us to government corporations. The government formed Amtrak, for example, to manage the railroads. One major difference between private corporations and government corporations is that with private ones, the profits are distributed as dividends, whereas the profits of government corporations go toward perpetuating that corporation. Be sure to review this video as many times as you need and go over the questions and do your research and study hard.
Study hard. No. No. Oh, well, guess this one. I don't, oh, my mouse is not mousing. Oh, no, it can't be that. No. Is it really? Well, I hope so. I hope so. Yeah. Well, good. That's a good answer. I like that. Okay. Which is the money? Hello, learner. That's me. Here we go. Long way to go. Bro, bro. Bruh. Bruh. At least I know most of this already. Sort of.
In this module, we'll discuss structure, policy, processes, and outputs, and how legislation works. So how does Congress conduct business? In other words, how does a bill become a law? Bills go through a complicated but set of defined steps. First, members of the House formally introduce their bills by dropping them in the hopper. That's a bill located by the Speaker's seat, but in the Senate, there's no such thing. So senators hand their bills to a clerk or introduce it themselves on the Senate floor. At any step of the bill process, the bill can die. Bills are referred to the committee, which often refers them to subcommittees to study the bill and to hold hearings and to make recommendations. From that point, the bill goes back to the full committee because it's voted out of the subcommittee. So it goes back to the committee in which it was originally sent. The committee may accept the subcommittee's recommendations or start again and hold its own hearings and prepare its own amendments. The bill then reaches the markup stage, where a final version of the bill is written. The bill can die in committee, or it can be reported to the floor, meaning sent to the entire Senate or House for consideration. At that point, in the House, the bill would go to the Rules Committee, which decides the length of debate and to what extent amendments to the bill may be proposed from the floor. There are two types of rules. A closed rule severely limits amendments, while an open rule permits amendments to be proposed on the floor. Since the Senate does not have a Rules Committee and allows for unlimited debate, one key way to control the debate in the Senate is the use of the filibuster by individual senators. Filibuster is from a French word that means pirate, and this name is really appropriate, since a senator who launches a filibuster virtually hijacks the floor of the chamber by speaking for long periods of time and can talk about anything he or she chooses, including simply reading from the phone book, thus preventing the Senate from closing debate and acting on a bill. This mechanism, the filibuster, is the one that's most likely to weaken the party leadership in the Senate. The most famous filibuster in history is when Republican Senator Strom Thurmond held up the vote for 24 hours on the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Senator Strom Thurmond had run for president in 1948 on the Dixiecrat ticket, a third-party ticket, and he was against the segregation. He was for the segregation of the races. Does the senator's filibustering get to speak forever, you may be asking? The way to end a filibuster is to vote for cloture. A cloture rule, Senate Rule number 22, provides for a time limit to be placed on debate if 3/5, which is 60 senators, vote for it. Senators are then limited to an hour each and a time cap of a total of 30 hours. Only amendments that have been billed before the cloture vote may be considered once cloture is invoked. So the bill is put on the calendar after being reported out of the House Rules Committee. Now the bill has made it to the floor of the Senate. What happens next? Differences between the House and Senate versions of the bill, if not worked out informally, are resolved in conference committee. So it moves from the floor vote to conference committee. Conference committee consists of delegations from original House and Senate committees. After a bill is reported out of conference committee, it must be approved by both the House and the Senate. Often members at this point of Congress, they look for a quid pro quo, and they engage in what is sometimes called log rolling or vote trading. One will agree to vote for a piece of legislation important to the other and can call in a return favor at a future date. This idea of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, or mutual accommodations among members, suggests that to some extent congressional behavior is based on the principle of reciprocity. The president must then sign the bill in order for it to become a law. The other options the president has, specifically veto power, is discussed in Module 5.3. Be sure to watch this video as often as you need to in order to understand the material. You should also do your readings and go over the questions.
One hour and 10 minutes.
In this section, we'll be talking about the relationships between the institutions in the earlier sections, Congress, bureaucracy, the president, and the media. And we'll also be talking about the role and types of the media, because some people call the media the fourth branch of government. Let's get started.
No.
We've been talking about the relationships between institutions throughout the modules, such as in Module 2.1, when we discussed the President's duty to make appointments of Supreme Court justices and the Senate's job to confirm them. But here is some additional information. Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution gives the President the power to either call Congress into special session or adjourn Congress. It also instructs the President to, from time to time, give Congress information on the State of the Union. The President gives his State of the Union address each January. For a few examples of famous State of the Union addresses, see Module 4.6. Congress has delegated powers to the President, particularly during wartime. When Lyndon Johnson succeeded to the presidency upon the death of John Kennedy, he inherited a growing war in Southeast Asia. As the third prong of Kennedy's policy of flexible response, he had expanded the role of the Pentagon and the CIA to increase the training of paramilitary forces. Kennedy sent these forces, often Green Berets, to Vietnam and neighboring Cambodia and Laos, and termed them advisors rather than troops, since he had not asked Congress for a declaration of war. By the time of his death, there were about 16,000 advisors in Vietnam. When Congress delegated powers to Johnson in the form of the 1964 Tonkin Gulf Resolution, there were about 23,000 of these advisors in Southeast Asia. The resolution, based on a most likely manufactured incident in the Tonkin Gulf, has been called President Lyndon Johnson's carte blanche, or blank check, to expand U.S. involvement in the Civil War in Vietnam. Here you see him signing his carte blanche. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution authorized, quote, all necessary measures to repel any armed attack and prevent further aggression. It's really the closest the U.S. came to formally declaring war in Vietnam, because it did not. After that, Johnson sharply escalated the country's military involvement, adding close to 165,000 troops to the effort over the next year. A sustained bombing campaign followed from 1965 to 1968. Congress also delegated powers in fast-track authority to the President to negotiate foreign trade agreements. This gave Congress the power only to approve or disapprove of the treaty, but not to amend it, because amendments essentially send the treaty all the way back to start, back to committee and Congress, seriously slowing the agreement. It is often hard for foreign governments to treat with the U.S. because one president might agree to a treaty and the Senate may not consent, or the president's term may be up in the middle of negotiations, whereas many foreign leaders, like monarchs and dictators, rule for life. The president has a chief of staff, a national security advisor who provides him with regular briefings on military and intelligence matters, a council of economic advisors, as well as personnel to handle various policy issues and interact with the different parts of the United States government apparatus that handles those issues. For example, the White House Office of Legislative Affairs discusses legislative issues with members of Congress and at the same time keeps the president informed of legislative issues. The president also has speechwriters and a White House press secretary to manage the media. Now let's talk about the media, which is sometimes referred to as the fourth branch of government. Not because the Constitution mentions the media at all, because, to be clear, it does not, but because of the media's role in agenda setting. The ability of the media to define the importance of particular events and issues is called agenda setting, and we'll talk more about this in Module 4.6, the influence of public opinion on policymakers. But there is a widespread debate among political scientists and entire courses devoted to the question, which group sets America's policy agenda, the media, public opinion, or the president? Generally, the president has an advantage over Congress in promoting policy by using the media through the bully pulpit, a platform by which the president can push his agenda to the public. The term was coined by President Theodore Roosevelt, and he meant that the presidency is a terrific platform from which the president can advocate an agenda. Presidents have often been able to mobilize public opinion in their favor in order to gain support for their agenda in Congress. This did not work when President Wilson went on a whistle-stop train tour around the country to promote the U.S.'s involvement in the League of Nations after World War I. Isolationists in the Senate failed to ratify the treaty anyway. But it did work in the 1930s. President Roosevelt used the new popular medium for communication at the time, the radio, in a series of fireside chats to win public support for his New Deal programs. Just as FDR was the first radio president, JFK was the first president to use the television to his advantage. In fact, it helped him win the presidency over Richard Nixon in the 1960 election by a narrow margin. Those that listened to the radio, listened to the debate on the radio, they thought that both of them had done a similar job, but maybe Nixon sounded a little bit more presidential. But those that watched on television believed Kennedy had won. Nixon was recovering from a cold, and he was wearing so much makeup it was caked on, he still appeared sickly, and he was sweating all that makeup off, and therefore he appeared weak and unelectable. Generally, the president garnered more press attention than Congress throughout American history, until the 1990s, when, for a period of time, House Speaker Newt Gingrich appeared more often in print media than President Bill Clinton.
True.
President Barack Obama's win over John McCain in 2008 can be partially attributed to the fact that he was the first social media candidate. And President Donald Trump is using Twitter to get policy information across in an attempt to appeal directly to the public. Be sure to review this video and do the readings carefully and go over the questions.
Okay.
In this module, we'll talk about the roles and types of media. I've just mentioned different types of ways in which the president has garnered public support through mass media in Module 1.5.1. Mass media can be split into broadcast media, radio, television, and the internet, and print media, magazines, journals, newspapers. Congress, the president, and federal agencies all have their own websites to publicize their news, and today anyone can be a news journalist because of the advent of weblogs or blogs. Those under the age of 35 today tend to get their news from the internet and social media, whereas those over the age of 50 tend to get their news from television. And very few people are attentive policy elites. Attentive policy elites are those that follow the political news closely. Citizens tend to seek out media that reinforce rather than challenge their existing ideological views. Certain broadcast print media tend to appeal to conservatives, such as Fox News, The National Review, and Forbes, while others tend to appeal to liberals, like MSNBC, The Daily Beast, and Politico. Today, a typical news channel will have more commentary about the news from pundits, also called talking heads, than hard news itself. About 3/4 of Americans claim to get their news from TV. Studies have shown, however, that those that get their news from TV are not well informed about politics and policy matters. Why are they not well informed? Because TV is really part of the for-profit media. It's a business intended to make money. Since most people prefer entertainment to the news, infotainment is what TV is centered on. A story may or may not be covered by a TV station based on its newsworthiness, its ability to generate interest and additional coverage. So this is called market-driven journalism. A dramatized, sensationalistic human interest story will get more viewers than a dry story based on only fact after fact. As will stories about violence, which gives credence to the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. So TV stations are dependent on advertisements to make money. A headline about violence will hook a viewer to watch most of the program and the ads, and the story highlighted in the headline won't then appear until sometime near the end of the show. Candidates also look for free advertising from the media by creating media events, or events so large the media will just have to cover it. Candidates create sound bites, which are short phrases to sum up ideas, and talking points that are meant to convey larger policies by simplifying them into short, digestible phrases or sentences that a general public can easily understand. The work of the news media differs from public relations, which is communications carried out to improve the image of companies, organizations, or candidates for office. Public relations is not a neutral information form. While journalists write stories to inform the public, a public relations spokesperson is paid to help an individual or an organization get positive press. Public relations materials normally appear as press releases or paid advertisements in newspapers and other media outlets. Some less reputable publications, however, they publish paid articles under the news banner, blurring the line between journalism and public relations. The U.S. government believes that the airways are public and created the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, to hold the media accountable, to regulate them, and to prevent any one network from gaining too much power. Certain things are not allowed on the public news channels that are allowed on cable networks, like pornography, for example. In addition to the agenda-setting role the media arguably plays, as discussed in 1.5.1, the role of the media is to inform the public about what government is doing and hold the government and politicians accountable to the public in return. The media, as well as the public, can request more transparency from governments by requesting documents through the 1966 Freedom of Information Act. This is called FOIA-ing documents, F-O-I-A, and it can be a long process. Something FOIA may not be received by the person FOIAing it for years. The government is required to release the information, though, unless this particular information meets one of 9 exemptions. Some of these exemptions are based on national security, personnel rights, or trade secrets. Continue to review the information and go over the questions and watch the video as many times as you need to.
Boy, boy, no. Oh boy, I'm taking a break after this. Okay. 1 hour and 20 minutes. That's not bad. You did pretty good. Oh boy. Ugh. Of course. Oh. Wait. Greetings. Greetings. It's PDF. This is probably all very important. Bicameral. Virginia, New Jersey. Oh yeah, I don't. So this is what she means by the readings. Can't. I just can't. I just can't. Oh, I just can't. Oh, no, I can't. Oh, I'm not ready. No. 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 Mm-mm. Oh, I'm gonna regret not looking at these, but I just can't. Nope, I have to go back. Do these later. Okay, good. Up to 2. I gotta do the readings another time. Because I'm getting ants in my pants. Oh boy. Oh. Hour 20 minutes. How am I gonna survive 2.5-hour classes? I don't know.